There comes a moment in a man's life when the noise fades, not because the world becomes quieter, but because he finally steps away from it. No applause, no validation, no distractions dressed as connection, just silence. And in that silence, something uncomfortable happens. You begin to see clearly. Not the world as you hoped it was, not people as you wanted them to be, but reality as it is. Most men never reach this point. They stay surrounded, busy, stimulated, emotionally dependent. But the man who spends enough time alone, not lonely, but alone, undergoes a quiet transformation. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote not to impress others, but to steady his own mind in solitude. And what solitude teaches a man about love, desire, and emotional control is not comfortable, but it is freeing. If this is your first time here, this channel exists for men who value clarity over comfort. If you're serious about mental strength and calm power, subscribe, not for motivation, but for mastery. Now listen carefully. Solitude doesn't make a man bitter. It makes him honest. When you were alone long enough, you begin to notice something unsettling. Much of what you called love was actually fear of being alone. Much of what you called desire was actually a need to be wanted. And much of what you called connection was simply emotional noise. The Stoics warned about this. They believed that anything you need can be used to control you. Approval, attention, affection. When a man hasn't mastered himself, he seeks completion through others. But solitude removes the mask. Without an audience, you are forced to confront your motives. Why do I want to be admired? Why does rejection disturb me so deeply? Why do I confuse attention with worth? These are not comfortable questions. That's why most men avoid being alone. They fill the silence with entertainment, with relationships, with constant stimulation. But the Stoic path demands something else: stillness. In stillness, you begin to see patterns. You see how easily emotions sway you, how desire clouds judgment, how attachment creates anxiety. And here is the first great lesson solitude teaches. If your peace depends on another person's behavior, you are not free. This isn't about rejecting love, it's about understanding it. A Stoic man doesn't avoid relationships, he refuses to be ruled by them. Solitude teaches restraint. You stop chasing, not because you are uninterested, but because you are no longer desperate. And desperation is invisible to the desperate, but painfully obvious to everyone else. When a man stands comfortably alone, he becomes selective. Not cold, not arrogant, selective. He stops asking, "Do they like me?" and starts asking, "Is this aligned with my values?" This shift is subtle, but powerful. Most people live externally. They measure their worth through reactions. A Stoic lives internally. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that praise and criticism come from the same unstable source, other people's opinions. Solitude trains you to detach from that source. You learn to enjoy your own company, to trust your own judgment, to regulate your emotions without outsourcing them. And once you master this, something surprising happens. You become calmer around others, less reactive, more grounded. Not because you don't care, but because you care correctly. You no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional depth. You no longer chase excitement at the cost of peace. And people feel this. Calm is rare. Self-control is magnetic. But here's the part most men misunderstand. Solitude doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible. You stop blaming others for how you feel. You stop expecting people to heal what you haven't confronted. The Stoics believed this was maturity. Epictetus taught that we suffer not because of events, but because of our judgments about them. Solitude reveals those judgments. It shows you where you are attached, where you are reactive, where you are weak. And weakness, once seen clearly, can finally be strengthened. This is why solitude feels uncomfortable at first. You are meeting yourself without distractions. But discomfort is not danger, it's growth. In the next part, we will explore how solitude reshapes a man's understanding of desire, why uncontrolled desire leads to loss of respect, and how Stoics trained themselves to remain composed even in emotionally charged situations. If this resonates with you, like the video. It helps this wisdom reach men who need it. And tell me in the comments, do you find strength or discomfort in solitude?
Something subtle happens when a man spends enough time alone. Not isolation born from bitterness, but solitude chosen for clarity. At first, the silence feels uncomfortable. There's no one to impress, no one watching, no one validating. And that's when the mind begins to change. The Stoics believed that most suffering does not come from events, but from the opinions we attach to them. Marcus Aurelius wrote something close to this: "You are disturbed not by things, but by your judgment about things." This applies deeply to how men relate to women. Before solitude, many men look outward for worth. Approval becomes oxygen. Attention becomes proof of value. Not because women demand it, but because the man hasn't yet built a stable inner foundation. Stoicism never taught rejection of relationships. It taught freedom within them. And solitude is where that freedom is forged. When a man lives alone long enough, something important fades. The urgency, the need to be seen, the pressure to perform, the fear of being overlooked. He begins to notice how much of his behavior was driven by anxiety, not desire, not connection, but validation. This is not a judgment, it is an awakening. Epictetus warned that a person who depends on external approval becomes a slave to it. And once a man truly understands this, his perspective changes. He stops asking, "How do I impress?" and starts asking, "Is this aligned with who I am becoming?" This shift doesn't make him cold, it makes him clear. He no longer projects fantasies onto women. He no longer expects them to fill emotional gaps he never learned to fill himself. He sees women not as solutions, but as individuals with their own inner worlds, boundaries, and complexity. And paradoxically, this is when respect deepens, because need distorts perception, calm sharpens it. A man who is not desperate can listen, he can observe, he can choose. Stoicism teaches mastery of the self before mastery of circumstance, and solitude teaches a man where he still lacks mastery. He sees patterns clearly now, moments where he once chased attention that wasn't aligned, moments where silence would have served him better than persuasion, moments where walking away would have preserved dignity. Not with regret, but with understanding. Seneca wrote that time spent alone reveals who you truly are, stripped of masks. And in this stripped-down state, a man learns something essential. Attraction does not come from trying harder, it comes from being grounded. When a man is comfortable alone, he stops negotiating his worth. He no longer bends his values to be liked. He no longer fears disapproval. He no longer rushes intimacy. This doesn't mean emotional distance, it means emotional stability. And women feel this difference immediately, not because it's calculated, but because it's calm. Calm is rare. Calm signals safety. Calm signals confidence without noise. Calm signals a man who knows himself. Stoicism never encouraged dominance, it encouraged discipline. Not control over others, but control over impulses. When a man learns to regulate his emotions, his reactions soften. He listens more. He speaks less, but with intention. And this changes how he sees women. He no longer places them on pedestals, but he also doesn't diminish them. He meets them as equals, not as judges, prizes, or saviors. This balance is powerful, because when validation is no longer the goal, connection becomes possible. But this clarity only comes after something difficult, letting go of the idea that being chosen defines you. Solitude teaches that your worth exists even when unseen, even when unselected, even when alone. And once this truth settles in the bones, desperation disappears. A man who has lived alone long enough understands something few do. Loneliness is painful, but dependence is worse. He chooses solitude over self-betrayal, peace over performance, integrity over approval. And from this place, relationships, when they come, are healthier, because they are chosen freely, not clung to out of fear. This is why Stoics valued inner independence so highly, not to reject love, but to approach it without chains. If this part of the message resonates with you, pause for a moment, reflect. Where have you been seeking validation instead of alignment? And if this perspective is helping you see more clearly, give this video a like. It helps this wisdom reach others who are quietly searching too. In the next part, we'll explore how this inner shift changes a man's presence, boundaries, and emotional power in relationships, without manipulation, without games, and without losing compassion. Stay with me. This is where the transformation becomes visible.
There's a moment that happens quietly. No announcement, no dramatic turning point, just a slow realization. The man who has lived alone long enough stops seeking something from women and starts choosing himself, not out of bitterness, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. Stoicism never taught isolation as punishment. It taught solitude as refinement. Marcus Aurelius wrote something close to this idea. Withdraw into yourself whenever you need to regain your strength. And when a man withdraws long enough, his inner compass recalibrates. He begins to notice something profound. He is calmer than before, less reactive, less eager to impress, less willing to chase attention. And because of that, everything changes. Before solitude, many men unknowingly approach women from lack of validation, lack of self-worth, lack of direction. They seek approval disguised as romance. They confuse desire with need. Stoicism warns against this state. Epictetus taught that when you place your peace in the hands of another, you become their prisoner. And solitude teaches this lesson directly. A man who lives alone long enough learns to sit with silence, with boredom, with discomfort, and instead of escaping it, he masters it. This is where standards are born. Not standards rooted in arrogance, but standards rooted in self-respect. He no longer asks, "Do they like me?" He asks, "Does this align with my life?" He stops chasing emotional highs. He starts valuing emotional stability. He notices that attraction fades when it costs inner peace. And here is something most people don't talk about. When a man becomes emotionally self-sufficient, his energy changes. He listens more. He speaks less. He reacts slower. He doesn't rush to fill silence. He doesn't over-explain himself. And this calm presence becomes noticeable, not because he is trying to impress, but because he's no longer trying at all. Stoics believed that the strongest influence is quiet strength. Seneca wrote that nothing is more admirable than a soul that remains steady under pressure, and this steadiness becomes the man's new language. He doesn't need to dominate conversations. He doesn't need to prove intelligence. He doesn't need to perform confidence, because confidence has become internal. This changes how he sees relationships. He no longer looks for someone to complete him. He looks for someone who can walk beside him without disrupting his path. He values consistency over excitement, character over charm, peace over intensity. This isn't emotional coldness, it's emotional discipline. And discipline creates freedom. The man who has lived alone long enough understands that attraction should not cost dignity. He recognizes red flags faster. He tolerates less chaos. He leaves sooner when peace is threatened. Not angrily, not dramatically, quietly. Because Stoicism teaches that you don't argue with storms, you step away from them. And here's the paradox. This detachment does not push people away, it filters. Those who seek validation leave. Those who seek grounding stay curious. The man becomes selective without becoming closed, open but anchored, interested but not desperate. And in this state, he stops romanticizing struggle. He no longer believes love must be painful to be meaningful. Stoicism teaches that suffering is not proof of depth, wisdom is. This is the inner shift. Solitude removes illusions. Stoicism replaces them with truth. And the truth is simple. When a man becomes complete on his own, he doesn't fear losing anyone. He fears losing himself. And that is where real strength begins. In the next part, we'll explore the final transformation, how this Stoic clarity reshapes attraction, boundaries, and purpose, and why most people never reach this level of calm. Stay with me. You're closer than you think.
There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes something quietly powerful. It's not about women. It's not about isolation. It's not even about being alone. It's about clarity. When a man has lived alone long enough, when he has faced his thoughts without distraction, he stops needing the world to complete him. And this is where Stoicism speaks most clearly. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with calm understanding. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that people act according to their nature, their fears, and their conditioning, not according to our expectations. And when a man truly understands this, he stops taking everything personally. He stops projecting fantasies. He stops demanding fulfillment from others. He stops turning relationships into emotional battlegrounds. This is not coldness. This is maturity. A man who has mastered solitude does not fear connection. He simply refuses to depend on it. He understands that attraction fades, attention shifts, and emotions change, not because people are flawed, but because change is the law of life. The weak man fights this truth. The Stoic accepts it, and acceptance is freedom. When a man no longer seeks validation, he begins to see people as they are, not as saviors, not as threats, not as trophies, but as human beings. He listens more, he reacts less, he chooses carefully. This is why his presence feels different, not louder, not dominant, but grounded. People feel safe around calm strength. A Stoic man does not chase affection. He does not beg for attention. He does not manipulate to be desired. He builds a life so full that companionship becomes a choice, not a necessity. And paradoxically, this is what makes him attractive. Because energy never lies. Desperation repels, stability invites. When a man has lived alone long enough, he learns to regulate his emotions. He does not confuse loneliness with love. He does not confuse desire with purpose. He does not confuse approval with worth. Epictetus warned that if you give someone power over your emotions, you become their servant. And many men unknowingly hand over this power. They shrink themselves to be accepted. They tolerate disrespect to avoid solitude. They abandon their principles to keep someone close. The Stoic does the opposite.
He would rather be alone in dignity than accompanied in self-betrayal. And this is not arrogance, it is self-respect. A man who respects himself naturally respects others. He doesn't objectify, he doesn't idealize, he doesn't resent. He understands boundaries, his own and others. This is where real balance is found. Stoicism does not teach withdrawal from love. It teaches freedom within love, to care without clinging, to desire without dependency, to commit without losing yourself. This is the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment says, I need you to be okay. Connection says, I choose you already whole. And people feel this difference instantly. When a man has lived alone long enough, he also learns silence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence of confidence. He doesn't explain himself endlessly. He doesn't defend his choices to critics. He doesn't argue with people committed to misunderstanding him. Marcus Aurelius said, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. And that is exactly what happens here. The Stoic man stops talking. He starts being. His discipline speaks. His boundaries speak. His calm speaks. This is why his life feels lighter, because he is no longer dragged by emotional extremes. No obsession, no bitterness, no entitlement, just presence. And here is the final truth, the one that transforms everything. When you stop needing others to fill your emptiness, you stop approaching life from lack. And when lack disappears, so does fear. You are no longer afraid of being alone. You are no longer afraid of rejection. You are no longer afraid of loss, because you know something deeper now. You know that peace is internal, that worth is self-generated, that strength is quiet. This is what Stoicism gives a man who has faced solitude honestly, not superiority, not detachment from humanity, but mastery of himself. And a man who masters himself cannot be controlled, not by desire, not by fear, not by opinion. He walks forward, calm, composed, grounded, whether accompanied or alone. And that is true freedom. If this message resonated with you, like this video so this wisdom reaches others who need it. Comment below, what did solitude teach you? And subscribe to Real Stoic Word if you're building calm strength in a chaotic world. Stay grounded, stay unshaken, stay stoic.